Hello and welcome back to day 4 of our online conference. We're so glad that you can join us once again to take part in our conference. We're also really grateful to have all our speakers from earlier on this week to join us to hand over your questions to. We've had a really great number of questions coming in today. I hope we're able to get through all of them. I apologise now if we don't get through them, but we will try our best. This is going to be a bit strange today because we don't really have a response back from those that have answered their questions, but if you want to feedback after today, we can see if we can expand further on those questions if you want a more full answer from any of our speakers today. Before we get started, I'm going to pray and then we'll get straight into our first question. Father, thank you again that we are able to join together to meet and discuss more thoroughly some of the issues that have come up this week. I thank you for each of the speakers. I thank you for everyone that has joined in and participated from home this week. And I ask that we are able over the next half an hour or so to answer some of these questions that have been presented to us today. Amen. Okay, question number 1. So this first question has come in. In fact, the first 2 questions are probably along the similar sort of lines, which I think I'll be directing towards Rhoda and Dave first, which is this: where can a science graduate in their first job find fellowship with other scientists in the same area of science?
Well, your obvious first start is if there is a CIS local group to where you are. There's a whole network of them, and some of them are more active than others. Some of them are affiliated to universities, but that's a very good place to start, which I'm sure is the textbook answer for CIS.
Absolutely, thank you for the publicity. Yeah.
The other one is within your workplace, particularly if you're in a larger organisation. Try looking for a Christian fellowship within your company. If you're within an academic one, try seeking out your university chaplain. They might know. And even if you're not, if you've got a Christian mug or a Christian calendar on your desk, or even if you don't have those, maybe a fish on your security lanyard, so that other Christians can find you and you can start.
Great. Rhoda, do you want to add anything?
Well, Dave said it all, really. I was also going to point you in the first instance to Christians in Science local groups. If you can't find a group, then you might want to consider setting one up, and Christians in Science can help you do that. But that might be a bit of a big step if you're currently feeling a bit new and on your own in a new job. So really start small and try and find one other Christian. And what Dave said about kind of subtle signs is actually really helpful. Sometimes you can bring it in casually into conversations about what did you do at the weekend? Oh, I went to church, and then someone else might pick up on that. Oh, you're also a Christian. I actually discovered a Christian colleague who was in my office and happened to see something from Christians in Science lying around on my desk that I hadn't deliberately put there. It just happened to be there, and he said, "So tell me, what is Christians in Science?" And I said, "Well, that's a bit out of the blue. Why did you ask me that?" And he said, "Oh, well, I saw that on your desk, and well, I'm a Christian and I'm a scientist, and so I thought it was relevant to me." And it was the first I realised that he was also a Christian. So sometimes these things come out completely naturally, but you need to be prepared to be a bit brave and a bit open about yourself, and then you'll find other people will come out of the woodwork, and you find that there are Christians around you that you didn't realise were there.
Yeah, great. And I think as a collective group of people here, we probably have experienced lots of examples like that ourselves. Along the same sort of lines, that's very useful if we're working with the same people every single day, which many of us might be doing on our jobs. But one question that's come in says, what advice do you have for those working in different circumstances? They might be working on their own from home, they might be self-employed, they might not regularly meet with the same people. So what about those that don't have those maybe normal day-to-day work colleagues? Do you have any advice for them?
If you are again, this is basically if you're in a large organization, if you're field based or working from home, an awful lot of these groups are now increasingly going online. So I work for Thames Water, and our Christian Fellowship is held across Microsoft Teams, as well as meeting in various office buildings, so that our field staff can come and join. With self-employed and things, it can be harder, but again, see if you can track down your local CIS group if there is one round. Likewise, see if you can find other people connected into the faith and work community through your church, through other local churches in the area, and yes, be prepared to connect with those and see where you go. I mean, we're people like CIS, like Transform Work UK. We're always very up to put people in contact with other people where we can. So feel free to reach out to us.
Yeah, and over this week we hopefully put out enough contact details for those that need to speak to any one of us. So if you are sitting at home and you're in that situation, please do feel free to get in contact with us. I'm going to give Dave and Rhoda a little bit of a break now, because I think this question is quite well suited for Cara. But some people, we had a message in about some of the social media articles about the impact of what coronavirus or COVID-19 is doing to our planet. So I'm just going to read this a bit more directly. So we're seeing lots of numerous articles being posted on social media that the atmosphere might be getting better because people are staying at home. And they tend to say that the earth is clearing up, and I think many of us might have seen videos and pictures of animals going to places that we wouldn't normally see them because people aren't there. So Cara, this person was wondering what you make of this, whether you think there's any truth in these claims, or is it too early to necessarily see those effects at this stage?
Oh, great question. Well, I think when you look at the satellite observations and even the computer models, what seems to be coming across is that they are finding huge decreases in sort of pollution, particulate matter in areas. And so I would assume that that is leading to kind of local improvement in the here and now for the people living there. But I'm also not a climate specialist. I do follow quite closely the work and kind of material of Catherine Hayhoe. I don't know if people are aware of her. So she is a climate scientist. She's based in the US, and she's also a Christian, and she speaks very well and very clearly on a lot of things like this. And I know in one of her more recent things that she's put out there is that she thinks it may be a bit too soon to say that this is going to now result in kind of a net long-term reduction in pollution or carbon emissions, because as soon as this threat passes, activity is just going to ramp up again, and so that makes predictions harder. But if we do kind of pick up life after this in a different way to what we've been doing before, and that's the hope, then maybe this could be the start of kind of good long-term change. Yeah, I don't know if that's helpful.
Yeah, I mean, the second part to this question that this person's provided is basically bringing the Christian perspective into that. If we are seeing this radical evidence, if that does come to light, that the way we are currently living is having such an impact on the environment, what the Christian response might be. And that's quite a big question as well. I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
No, it's really good. there is something about seeing, I mean, we never could have run an experiment like this if we wanted to, but kind of seeing those really stark satellite images of the change, hopefully, I mean, for all humans, will just strike some sort of an emotional chord to make us think a little bit more. So I don't think as a Christian it would be loving to advocate like this is the new reality and we should all be cutting back to this extreme because it's involving a lot of suffering for a lot of people. But if we could take some lessons from this and then find a middle ground going forward, that we can implement changes in our own lives now that we've seen what it could potentially do if we all clubbed together and just didn't live to such excess. If just a few people didn't live to such excess, what we could be doing for the health of the planet, but also people worldwide who are affected way worse than we probably are.
Great, thank you for that answer. I'm going to come to Rhoda now. This got quite a response on Monday, and we didn't quite have the time to cover it. So if you thought your question wasn't going to be answered, this is the question now. We had a couple of questions in response to you saying that you believe in evolution, and a few people just wanted and that expanded on somewhat. I know that's a big question, so you might not be able to answer that completely fully, but if you're able to elaborate a bit more on your understanding of evolution, I think some of our viewers would really value that.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, that's an enormous question. The first thing I'd like to say is that I am trained as a theoretical physicist, not as an evolutionary biologist. So I'm not the best expert to talk on evolution. But what I can do is talk about my general understanding of science and the way that evolution actually impacts on my own research in biological physics, and also my approach to this theologically. So I'm somebody who's never had a big problem with evolution theologically, although I do know many people who have. There's two books I'd like to recommend, written by people who are much more experts on evolution itself than me. So one is written by Dennis Alexander. So it looks like this, and the book's called Creation or Evolution, Do We Have to Choose? This is a fabulous book written by Dennis Alexander, really going into the details of the science of modern day science of evolution. And I find that really exciting book, scientifically really helpful, but it also really goes into a lot of discussion about these sorts of issues. The other one is quite a different style of book. This is called The Language of God, and it's by Francis Collins, who, and when I say it's a different style of book, it's not really written as a science book. It's written as a personal story of his own science and his own faith. So he was the director of the Human Genome Project, and heavily involved in that project of sequencing the human genome for the first time. This massive, exciting a scientific project, which obviously has a lot of impact on the science of evolution. And he's a committed Christian and has written this lovely book describing his own position on that one. So those are two books of real experts who I would recommend you have a look at. But in terms of answering the question for me personally, I've actually always resonated with what Charles Kingsley said back in his response in letter form to Darwin on his first reading of Darwin's Origin of Species, which was so Charles Kingsley was a famous Christian at the time, and his response was, well, I mean, I'm paraphrasing here in my own language, but something along the lines of, well, actually, isn't it amazing, the idea that our creator God could have created creatures that create themselves in this evolutionary way? And that's actually wonderful. And that's really the way I respond to evolution. I see it as our best guess at the moment in terms of science as to how the world came to be. And I see it as a mechanism that God used and is continuing to use in creation, both in creation in terms of the beginning of creation, but also the ongoing creation that God's continually involved in creating and maintaining his creation. So that's the way I see it, as a scientific mechanism that fits very naturally with my belief that God is creator. But I do know that some people have quite a number of specific issues with that, often based on their reading of the first chapter of Genesis, which is the first chapter of the Bible, which in the original Hebrew is written in a poem style. And we need to look at that text carefully to fully understand what it's talking about, and to understand its theological point, which I believe is that God made the world and it's good. And I think if we try to read that chapter as if it was a scientific textbook, then we quickly get into big problems. But I don't think it was meant to be a scientific textbook, neither then nor now. So I think it's important that when we read the Bible, we not only read bits taken out of context from the rest of the Bible as a whole, and of course, Genesis 1 is only one of the creation stories in the Bible, but also that we think about who is it written for, what style is it written in, what is its theological meaning, what is the point about God in this writing. And if we want to learn more about the amazing science going on about trying to understand the world and how it came to be, then we need to look at science rather than the Bible.
Yeah, and the Bible, tells us about God's world as much as the world tells us about God's world, because he made it. So if we're investigating that, that's only a good thing. And I think that the word evolution has become so provocative now. That's often the challenge that both Christians and scientists are wrestling with, is the association of what people might have said over time, or misunderstandings within what evolution actually is. Cara, did you want to add anything?
Well, yeah, just on a personal level, I did study biology, and it's something that quite naturally just came into my life. And I didn't realize until that point when I was studying how kind of just a subconscious level of feeling like I wasn't allowed to even investigate evolution, how it had crept into my subconscious. And it was never like a deliberate, someone had presented it to me. It was just amazing how that assumption had crept in. So just being encouraged to think about it and to look into it was incredibly liberating. And then alongside reading books, especially Francis Collins' one, for me, it was freeing to be able to say, let's go explore God's world. Let's see how he did it. Let's investigate the mechanism of how he did it, but let's also realize that this is all in his hands. I suppose kind of like we as Christians all believe that God knit us together in our mother's womb and he knew us before we were here. And yet there's nothing about developmental embryos that kind of threaten my belief in that. And I find that quite a helpful, just thinking of them as two different levels of thinking of the same thing. I find that quite helpful.
Great. As we said at the start of this question, it is a really big question. So if you feel that wasn't answered as fully as you'd like, or if anything was missing from those answers, please do get in contact with us. But I am going to have to move on now to the next question. So the next question, I'm going to, I think, direct this one to Dave for now. So this person said that they've been constantly challenging themselves over their beliefs in order to grow. But sometimes that can leave us burnt out, especially with work demands and various other things. So how do you balance your pursuit of religious kind of development and scientific truth, so both those truths, without favouring one and growing complacent with the other? How do you get that balance together?
I can't say it's the easiest thing to do, but it's one where you certainly look and ask the question of, are these things actually in conflict with each other? We are in both, as a Christian and as a scientist, we look for truth and things, and if we're being authentic in our lives, we are pursuing both. I think the other side to say is that we don't have um, anybody, a God or things that's going to say you haven't worked hard enough. God is there. God loves us, whether we push and are consistently challenging all the time, or whether we let everything slide. That's not going to affect our salvation. So I don't think we necessarily need to be beating ourselves up if we don't pursue these as far as we want, and just follow them as far as anybody is comfortable in doing.
Yeah, I think that's sorry, carry on.
I would say just the final one is just find yourself in a position where you've got people who can support you, whether that's in your local church, in your workplace, in your workplace group, in your CIS group. These things are lightened the load when you have other people to share it with.
Yeah, absolutely. I really like your response there. Would anyone else like to add anything to that? Go on, Rhoda.
Yeah, I'd like to say that it's important to find our own niche as well. So I'll be personal about this. When I first joined Christians in Science, I was a student, and I was very excited to join Christians in Science, very encouraged, and very impressed and amazed at some of the people I met through that and the talks I heard. But I also found it intimidating, actually. Especially as I grew a bit older, into a PhD student and a postdoc. How could these people possibly do all of this stuff? They were professional scientists, not just professional scientists, but highly successful professional scientists, and they were writing all these books about science and faith. They were studying theology as well as science. They were just doing everything. And I spent quite some years being completely overwhelmed by that and going, well, I've nothing to contribute. They're all these amazing people, and I'm going to sit back and listen to them. But I can't do all that. And in many ways, I still feel like that. And yet, the difference is that I now realise that there are some things that I can contribute in my own small way, and I don't need to be like them to contribute. And you don't need to be like people you see. Everybody has got things that we can contribute, and God puts people in different places with different skills at different times to be able to contribute things. And I think just because you see other people writing books and doing this, that and the other, and going around the world giving talks, doesn't mean to say that you need to do that to be able to contribute as well. So in that sense, look for where God is calling you to contribute, rather than feeling like you've got to do everything just because other people around you see are doing everything. So it might be that right now your focus should be on your science, or it might be that your focus should be on something to do with your faith. It is impossible to do everything all at once, but we don't need to do it all at once. We've got time. God will give us time to do the things He calls us to do. So I think what's most important is to prayerfully consider what God's calling you to be involved in right now, rather than feeling like you've got to do everything all at once.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know from personal experience, God equips you with those around you, or from actively seeking people to support you. God will equip you for the right moment and the right time for certain things to flourish, and also instructs rest as well. We should be resting, we should be taking time to be peaceful, whether that's with God, whether that is just on our own and having peace and quiet. We need rest and recuperation, and so I think that's an important element to that as well. Does anyone else want to add anything to that question?
That was great.
Just to say that don't be ashamed that if you find for whatever reason you don't have the capacity that some of your friends, colleagues, people you admire have. Some people are absolutely driven, can absolutely produce 10 papers before breakfast. Other people have got other reasons, are just not built in that way. I couldn't sit down and write books and things to do that, but that's not what God has made me for.
Great, thank you so much for that. Those answers to that question. I've got a question for Cara now. So you were talking yesterday about conservation work, and I was wondering if you had any suggestions of what sort of conservation work we individually could be doing in our own worlds, in our own lives, where we might be able to meet with groups, or what we might be able to do with our churches or at university or in our workplace. What conservation acts or action things we could do, sorry, I haven't worded that very well, we could be doing in our own workplace or our own world and lives, away from this week.
Well, in the church in particular, if you add together all the kind of land that churches have over the UK, we could actually have quite a good impact if we manage that well. And there are some schemes. Arosha UK's Eco Church comes to mind as just a good way to review kind of the way your church works, and maybe being able to identify some changes that you could make in order to kind of make a statement like, this is important to us, we're going to make these changes, and to actually make a difference from your church's point of view. Also on the church line, I think it can be as easy and simple as just incorporating creation care into the types of things we talk about, the types of things we preach about, sing about, pray about, just kind of bringing it into that church space, which I don't think is done a lot. And you might be surprised if you do kind of an online search at how many organizations have made resources to kind of facilitate that, whether it's a Lent course or a small group course, or songs. There's new music out there as well. So just making it more common that we discuss these things in church, I think would be quite a helpful thing to do. And Arosha is a great place to go to for that, but there's also eco congregations, and each denomination seems to have its own initiatives as well. So whether you then implement them in the church, or you go onto your local neighborhood network or Facebook group and start suggesting some activities, it doesn't necessarily have to be linked to your church, but as people come and talk to you about why you're so passionate, it might be a great way of explaining to people why we feel so strongly about the way we do. So it could be getting involved with local initiatives and using Facebook groups or whatever we have, to get the local community involved as well. It can only be a good thing.
Great. Does anyone else have anything to add to that? No? Okay, well, I'm going to throw you a curveball now, I'm afraid. We've had some questions come in while you were talking. We've got a question that says, what new challenges do you see from science or technology for the church? So what new things do you see that could make the church wrestle with, or that might be an issue or an area that might need to be looked at? I don't know who's going to go for this one.
I would say, just from the immediacy now, is as an organisation and church, we have built ourselves a model that involves everyone coming together. Now, as a result of everything that's going on now, we are discovering ways to be church while separated, and it's going to be an interesting challenge, not from a theological perspective so much as from a logistics perspective of how do you effectively be a church when you're scattered and doing things remotely, because there is so much to be gained from a one-to-one actually being physically in the presence of somebody. But I think there are great advantages to come, and I'm sure other people will have much more profound scientific things coming on the horizon.
Yeah, I'm wondering if anyone could expand a bit more on the challenges we might have. I think we certainly are taking advantage of the good things out of technology today and all of this week. But are there any things that might come up that you think might be controversial or difficult to process over the next couple of years? Go on, Rhoda.
I think one area that is already difficult, and I suspect will become harder, in terms of a challenge for Christians is in the area of medical ethics. As science and technology improves and we're able to do more and more things within the sphere of medicine, in terms of genetic medicine and reproductive medicine, and these areas, some of them are really very tricky from an ethics perspective. And as Christians, I see us as having a certain responsibility to be involved in thinking through some of those things and thinking through some of the ethics, because as scientists, we're not trained as scientists to do ethics. And the church and Christians actually has an important contribution to play there in terms of helping society to think through some of the ethical considerations that are coming up because of the technological advances that we're making. So I think there's some difficult decisions that need to be made, and these could get harder as more things come on board. And I mentioned medical ethics in there, but there may also be some things coming in the a little bit further forward in the future in terms of artificial intelligence, and again some of the ethics of surrounding that. So those are the areas I think that will bring new challenges for the church to engage in.
Yeah, and I think partly one of the purposes of Christians in Science in the first place is to encourage those that work in science industry that are Christians to be at the heart of those new developments, so that we have a voice in where the ethics go there. And I think that's incredibly important, that we're advocating people to be in the sciences to help in those developments. There's one more question that's come in that I think is a really nice note to end on. So I'm going to go to each of you for this question. The way this is viewed on screen, I'm going to probably go Dave, Cara, Rhoda. So we'll go around in a nice little circle, and then I will end today. But the question is, what new ideas from science excites you that you want people at church to know about? Or is there something, if you can't think of anything new, what might have sparked your interest maybe in science that you think is maybe a bit unheard of, that you would love to share with everyone today? Dave looks like he's still thinking. Does anyone else want to have a go at this?
I could start if you want.
Yeah.
So it's a general point, actually, rather than a specific discovery in science, but it's something that it is very much in vogue, if you like, in the science community now, and that's interdisciplinary working. So I myself am an interdisciplinary scientist. I was trained as a physicist, but I work in biological physics in teams with other scientists. And I think this is something that's very exciting at the moment in terms of bringing traditional disciplines of science together to be able to tackle questions as teams collaboratively, with different people bringing different perspectives on the question. And I think this is an exciting development for science research at the moment, because we're able to tackle questions that are really at the interface between different areas, and I do think that together we can be more than the sum of the parts, and we can actually come up with some really new, creative, exciting science in that way. So that's something that I would like people in churches to know more about, the fact that there are scientists out there working together on areas that they need to work together to make progress on. So that's something I'd like people to know about.
Great. Should we go back to you, Dave?
I think I would say mine would actually be on a similar note, and that is just the amazing stuff that's being done by people who are both Christians and scientists, about how the interface between faith, between science, between the Sunday and the rest of the week, and how people effectively look at the great things God's done with analytical eyes, not just through what they see and hear on Sunday, but actually just by looking around and looking at what scientists are doing.
Great. Should we end with you, Cara?
Please do. Sometimes it can be a little bit confusing if you're not entrenched in the science to think, how can you still be studying these systems? Surely we know everything about them. Take something like a coral reef. I mean, it's within our reach. It's not the deepest part of the ocean or anything, and we've been looking at it for years and years and years. What more can you still be discovering? And yet we keep getting better equipment, zooming in at a higher level, and we think we've kind of got it, and then we just get a whole different level in terms of the intricacies of different relationships, and there's just so much to discover. You zoom in and you find out now that one coral colony is actually a whole habitat unto itself, and you've got these microorganisms now in little habitats within their tissues, and you just keep zooming in and you keep finding things, and that's just exciting. So it's not like a science, let's look at it, okay, we've solved it. It's just a constant questioning, and as soon as you go to that level, you'd be like, but what's at the next level, or what happens to that relationship? And there's just so much going on, and that's just a coral reef. So I think, yeah, we should probably be better as scientists about talking about what we're finding, so that we can actually convey that excitement, so that people actually understand more about the scientific process, rather than just thinking it's a mechanism to get answers and teach other people and then move on.
Yeah, I immediately think of another example of where I've just been wowed, like you're saying, you just delve deeper and deeper. I always found it amazing understanding that our understanding of where most elements are created, especially things as heavy as iron and above in the periodic table, our understanding up till recently has been that they're created in supernovas, the most explosive things we understand in the universe. And I went to a recent lecture at Cardiff University about gravitational waves, and the understanding that's come out of that suggests that actually many of our elements were produced when neutron stars have collided and black holes have collided together, and the immense energy from those actually could be a higher contribution than supernovas. Now that's new and developing science. It might change, it might adapt to something else, but when I heard that, I was blown away by God's world and the way that he creates and makes things, and we think of black holes as being so destructive, and yet there's a suggestion that they're very creative and a good process as well. I want to just say thank you to all of you for joining me once more today. I have really personally valued every one of your talks and all of your answers you've contributed today. So really, really thank you so much. I've just noticed on YouTube there's been quite a lot of chat about some resources for the evolution stuff. So if you want to have a look at that, as well as some other environmental books, I haven't read them in much detail. I've just noticed that there's been a bit of chat there. So please, if you're watching on YouTube, have a look at those. They might answer a few more questions from other people that have been contributing today. There's one final thing before I sign off, and that is to explain what we're doing tomorrow. We are hopefully going to be reading some stories that you feel prompted to share with us tomorrow. So I'm calling it Your Testimonies. I'm trying to do this a few different ways. I'm hopefully going to get some videos from some of you if you'd like to contribute those, although that might be a bit tricky. So if you'd like to share with me a paragraph about where you might have done one of these things that we were discussing today, maybe something you've set up at work or at your university or at church that you think might be useful to share with the rest of our audience, it'd be great if you could send those in, preferably this evening, but don't worry if it is tomorrow. I'll try and incorporate it. The other thing, just to let you know about tomorrow, is we have quite a few notices and kind of things moving forward that I need to share with you. Tomorrow's session I don't anticipate being as long, but it would be really great if you could tune in just to get a few updates on a few things that Christians in Science will be doing over the next couple of months. So if you could tune in for that as well, I'd be really grateful. So one more thank you to each of you speakers. Thank you very much for joining in at home, and I look forward to seeing you all one last time tomorrow for your stories. Thank you very much, everyone. Goodbye.